Conas T, how are ye? Welcome to another Candlelittales podcast. My name is Sorcha, and I am sitting down in a different country from...
And my name is Aron Hegarty. Her brother. Damn it. I'm in Germany. And, we're talking about Irish myths. Technically, we're talking about the last episode, and the last podcast episode was the Second Battle of Moy Tura. And yeah, welcome to another Candlelit podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for, just sending us all your good ear waves.
That's oddly disturbing as an image, sending us your earwaves.
Yeah, it's a new thing I'm playing with, just like imagining the earwaves being sent from one person to the other by kinetically listening to the other person.
I think keep workshopping that one, maybe brainstorm it a little bit more, refine it. I do see your dance
though.
Yeah, it is part of your dance. You can see Aron's fancy apartment decor and his cool dance over on YouTube. If you're not watching this on YouTube, he's got an apartment. It's pretty tidy in frame, and I assume everything.
I know my frame. Trust me. I know my frames. I know my frames well.
I know.
Yeah, it's important to tidy up what's in frame. Very important. I bought some plants today, though. I was feeling a bit lonely because I didn't have enough plants. So I bought what looks like a sunflower plant. It's far too small to be a sunflower. It's just like a baby little sunflower plant.
And you also bought a purple thing that looks nothing like anything like a sunflower, which was actually what you were showing me while you were talking about sunflower.
Sorry, yeah. That's true. Over my right shoulder is the tiny baby, and then over here. So this is the purple flower that looks nothing like anything other than
it very much flower. Looked like you were like, here's something that looks like a little sunflower, and I was like, buddy, no. Not even.
So
not
anyway,
even slightly.
I was trying to get, close to the gorse kind of vibe, the
I know what you mean. Yeah. Well, we got lots of the yellow gorse here as well. Well, listen, I think we should say a special thank you to our Patreon supporters because they bought you a new microphone in Germany when your microphone broke. So
yeah,
thanks, guys, because that means we're able to keep recording and stay on schedule for this podcast for the summer. Because if not for you guys, his audio would be really rubbish. And I know, because we recorded a podcast the other day, that you're probably going to have to overdub. Sorry, buddy.
I hate overdubbing podcasts, but anyway.
I know.
I realized that I didn't do a backup audio. I hope this is fine. Yeah. Usually we record a backup.
We usually record a backup. Your backup can be slightly late. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's been fine so far. So thank you to our Patreon supporters. We're both a little bit tired. You had a frustrating day, and I had 3 buses in a row disappear from the bus arriving shortly time. So I was...
Well, no.
I wanted to kill everybody in the industry of public transportation and everybody else around me as well. And also, it was too sunny. Because it's too sunny. It's sunny.
It's pissing rain here. It's absolutely pissing rain here. It's suddenly the weather just turned. I actually kind of enjoyed it. It was raining. I was like, oh, look at that. It was like kind of warm rain, but I just spent too long out and in the rain, walking around the place, kind of getting flowers and doing bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And by the time I got back, I was like, oh yes, got to get my road mic that my Patreon supporters have supported us and given us, and great. And then DHL had delivered it, and they said, like, thank you, Olivia something Simpson has collected it for you. I was like, Olivia who? Sorry, how do I get? And this is an apartment complex with lots of other people, and I didn't know where they were, so I had no idea where this woman was, or where the package was, or where this mic was. So then I went running around. I put a bit of flyer up by knocking on some doors, and then eventually I realized I should probably just ring the landlady and ask her, which I did, and she returned my call. And then I got to the top floor of the other building where my mic was. Thank you, Olivia Simpson.
Yeah,
Olivia Simpson.
I did kind of think it was quite funny that we got an email that actually, what the email actually said was, Ihr Thomenpaket ist angekommen. Wir haben es Ihrem Nachbarn Olivia Trigg Simpson übergebracht.
Craig.
And I have no idea what any of that means, and I apologize for the terrible German accent, but I just think German sounds funny when I read it in a bad accent, and I apologize to anybody who disagrees, but I stand by it.
I mean, it also sounds a lot angrier than the sentiment.
Yeah,
was
it
meant.
always, invariably. It's a little
Invariably,
bit, it's a little bit like Brazilian Portuguese that way. It sounds angrier than it is. You know, hello, how are you? Sounds like a terrifying argument for some reason. I don't know why. It just always does. To me.
Yeah, you know, the unbiased, uneducated, non-linguistic siblings here. We just think German sounds angry. Now, not all of them. I've met lots of very lovely Germans. I'm going to backpedal a little bit. Actually, today, you know what? I was like, is Brickis do English? Because I was I went into a gym, went for a swim, came back out, realized I forgot to grab a towel at the entrance. And I was like, oh no, I have no towel. I didn't bring a towel because you're going to get the. So then I turned to the guy next to me. I was like, any chance you speak English, buddy? And that's kind of all I got really. I was like, Brickis do English? And he was like, yeah. And he gave me his towel. Like, how sound was that? So, you know.
That's a guy. You know what, Aaron? You would not do well in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy because you failed the basic test, which is knowing where your towel is. And that guy passed.
Always bring your towel.
That guy knew where his towel was. He's got it. He's got it going on. You, on the other hand, buddy. So
speaking of towels
and knowing what the heck is going on. Kind of.
The podcast, the story that we're supposed to be dissecting and talking about, we are basically analyzing and talking about what came up in the Second Battle of Moytura. And this is, let's face it, a story we've told a lot. We've kind of gone through the very first time we decided to do a theatre show, kind of a dance theatre-esque show, was based around Lugh, the Savildonach, the Killing of Balor, and Ethlin. We called it the Dream of Ethlin, where we kind of placed everything that she saw in her dream as this whole story. And it was a beautiful dance with Emma Byrne as one of the dancers, Jade Roxanne O'Connor and Stephanie Dufresne helped me out loads, and probably loads of other people that I can't quite remember right now.
Kat was involved in that one as well. Kat Lachlan
was involved, yeah.
And our usual crew.
And all of the musicians. Who, in fairness, Ruairi was spearheading that one. That was before Oisín joined, actually. But yeah, so we kind of went around that story a lot that year. That was 5 years ago now. And so that's kind of been one of the first times we really pushed a show into kind of a theatre version. And as a result, we ended up like reading quite a lot of other versions and looking at it from different points of view.
As we mentioned in our chats about the first Battle of Moytura, we also ended up nicking some of the cool stuff from the first Battle of Moytura and putting it into the second Battle of Moytura because we liked it. So we also did a little bit of amalgamating there and kind of putting things together. But yes, this is Moytura 2, the Moytura Ning. Except it's a different Moytura because it's in a different place. Because the first Battle of Moytura is in Moytura Kong, which is in Mayo, and the second Battle of Moytura is in Donegal, I believe.
Yeah, but so there was pillars in both of them.
Yeah, because this is the thing, the name Moytura, it refers to the plane of the pillars. Moy or Mai in Old Irish is a plane, and the Tura bit means apparently the pillars. And it was this idea that they raised pillars and posts for the poets and the bards to stand on and cast magic, but also like observe and record everything and sort of like document, except without documents, because it was just looking and remembering and then writing a song about it that was catchy. And yeah, so that's how you ended up with two Moyturas that are two places and two battles in two different time periods and two different locations, which I think is kind of classic Irish mythology move. Let's not make it the same place. Let's just give it the same name. and have it be a
That won't
completely
confuse them at
different
all.
thing in a completely different place. Of course, that can so confusing.
Similar, but not the same.
Similar,
So
but completely different.
So one of the things that kind of clicked with us when we were talking about how to tell a story was, oh, for the very first time, and we've expanded upon the character of Bress, the character of Lugh, and the character of Balor. It's kind of the three main players within this. Nuada was the other big player in it, I guess, but we focused on those three. And one of the things when we were talking about it, which like clicked for me for the very first time, and I can't believe it took so long, was that like the 7-year wait is such a bizarre thing. Bress asks for 7 years, and sometimes he's still kind of the king for that long, and then he eventually leaves. And other times he's gone, and they know he's going to raise an army and come and conquer the island again. And basically, Nuada is left in charge to gather the forces together for 7 years, though. So you're kind of like, why did it take that long?
Yeah, why 7 years?
Until we kind of went, well, I guess actually, like it's really, really, really hard to get the entire island to agree on one thing. We still can't do it today. Like we can't. There's a whole other bit of it that won't talk to us.
And even in the bit that does technically talk to each other, we still don't get anything done because everyone's going, no, it's your fault. It's not my fault. It's your fault. You did it.
So the idea of getting, and like I guess before, like since Ireland has had its independence, we've just had like obviously 100 years of squabbling, fighting, restlessness,
politics,
politics,
just regular politics.
I mean, like we've never had a dictatorship here, other than the colonial rule, right? But we've never actually had. We've never had a kind of a forcible rule or a top down. Everyone does what they're told
because
Irish people can't do that.
Well, I think it's part of our post-colonial thing is that we do not tolerate that. Like Ireland flirted with fascism at the same time the rest of Europe was flirting with fascism at around the time of like leading up to the Second World War. But Ireland steered very, very strongly away from that. And even in recent years where kind of far right parties are taking root in a lot of Europe and a lot of the Western world, we're still like it's not really rooting very strongly here. There are some kind of attempts at authoritarianism and that's kind of, racist nationalist stuff, but like Irish nationalism is quite different because Irish nationalism is still in some ways, because it is a post-colonial nationalism, it's not a nationalism of like we are the superior master race extending ourselves over the inferior. It kind of never has been. It's always been, well, hang on, we deserve to live too, which is a different starting point to like American nationalism or British nationalism. It can still get very, very toxic and very, very violent.
Sure.
But it starts from a very different place.
And I think one of the reasons that it starts from a different place is like this idea of tribalism, of like taking care of your own, and that myth or that story or that line that there's a king on every hill. There were areas that were governed by the locale, and that's all they had in mind for each other, and they didn't want to see across the far hill to deal with their problems because that's their problems over there and we'll push it away. And so like gathering all of the rulers of the country to come together and agree under a ruler who's kind of a peacekeeping ruler, like the High King, this idea of the High King being the strongest guy in Ireland. He was basically just a guy to settle quarrels.
It was less it seems to have been less of a feudal system than took again, kind of later sort of medieval Ireland, less feudal in their kingships than other parts of Europe. You see it in the kind of inheritance thing. You don't get like, I am the king ordained by God because I was born the first son of this king that was also ordained by God, because we didn't do the primogeniture thing. It just didn't. Are you laughing at my accent?
That cracked me up. I did not expect that.
To be
That
fair,
was very funny.
I've always thought it is a supremely silly argument and deserves to be delivered in an extremely silly voice, because that is the voice that goes in. That's kind of the voice that goes in my head whenever I hear, you know, anybody say anything about like manifest destiny. It's like, oh, I'm a Mythic, I got here first. You know, it just sounds supremely silly and deserves to be parroted in a supremely silly voice. So we had a slightly
Good point.
different mindset here. Interestingly, ancient Ireland was extremely hierarchical. Modern Ireland is kind of famous for not being particularly hierarchical, which I think in some ways is a little bit of a myth, because we definitely have a lot of, we have our share of classism and
Sure.
snobbery, but ancient Ireland was incredibly hierarchical. And again, you had that tribal mentality of like, well, my patch is okay, so why do I care about what's going on in this other place down the road? That clearly has nothing to do with me and no impact on me whatsoever. So the idea of Nuada as a sort of not a top-down leader, but like a facilitative leader of, you know, a lot of co-equal kings who were very status obsessed in a culture where certain ranks of lord could outrank certain ranks of king. So it all got real confusing. And the idea of him trying to shepherd them to consensus.
Yeah, that would drive you bonkers. And as soon as you got three of them to agree, three more would disagree. And like, I can only imagine how frustrating that would be. Like, even compared to our own history, you know, the 1916 Rising was like a faction, a small group of the Republican Army, basically, you know, taking up arms, and most of the rest of the people in Ireland saying, "Don't do it. We don't want it. We don't want a war." You know, basically the majority. So you have this really difficult task for Nuada, who obviously represents the kind of like the strong arm of Ireland in this story, to like stand up against the opposition. And he's kind of counseling to try and turn the tide. And yet he has all of these various forms of tribes and kingships and areas that are basically kind of going, no. Like we've heard from the Brest story that, you know, there was one sonnet or one satire written that kind of made everyone realize that Brest was an awful king. But making people realize Brest was an awful king and should be deposed is one thing, but then convincing everyone to go to war is a jump.
It's a lot easier to persuade people what the problem is than it is to persuade people what the solution is. In my general experience of both life and everything to do with politics, it's actually not, like, it's often not that hard. Sometimes it can be hard because sometimes people are, you know, deep into a narrative that they don't want to get out of, but like it's often not that difficult to go, this is the problem. Like, you know, with the housing crisis in Ireland, everybody pretty much agrees that there is one and it's bad, right? Like at this, by now, took a while. Took a long time of the market will solve it. You know, the God market. It will come in and solve it.
It's not that bad, guys. Guys, come on. It's not that bad.
It's not that bad.
I mean, like,
so,
I own 3 houses, so it's fine.
It's clearly fine. Again, silly voices for silly arguments for silly people. Apologies to anybody who actually has any of these stupid accents that we keep putting on. I'm sure they're lovely.
Don't call it a stupid accent in the same sentence where you apologize about it. Like that's a double whammy.
We're making it sound stupid, but it isn't stupid. Accents are fine. Yeah,
I'm sorry if you have a stupid accent, but that's on you. That's just
maybe try not having a stupid accent, you know. Sorry.
Oh God! I said, can we edit this? We're not gonna edit this.
We'll edit this out. Aron, let's just say that we're gonna edit it out like we always do, and then not edit the post show because neither of us like editing. And just if anybody yells at us, they'll yell at us. It'll be fine.
And every time we ask Oisín to do it, he listens and goes, "Nah, it's funny if I leave it in."
It's funny if Yep. Thanks, Ash.
We've since stopped asking Oisín to do that.
Yeah. So what was my point? I can't remember my point. Everybody has by now come to agree that there is a housing crisis, but it is so much more difficult to get people to agree on what the solution is, because solutions are often complex and messy and costly and painful and difficult and involve a lot of time and a lot of steps. And something like Bress is a bad king, we need to get rid of him, is like, yeah, cool, fuck that guy. And something like, okay, now he and all his mates are going to attack us maybe. So we need to commit all of our resources and all of our like fighters, and we need to like, because like war is expensive. Like it's basically, we got to divert all of our surplus from where it's going into like making life better for everybody. After, by the way, years under Bress's rule where people didn't have a surplus because it got taxed off them. And now it's like, see all this extra money you have. I actually am going to need that. I'm going to need all of that, and also all of your free time and all of your young, strong people to maybe die and just come here and instead of this going into tribute, you now need to make like a similar sacrifice in order to go to war. And you can see, I get why people, like you said, it kind of made sense as we were talking about this podcast in a way that it hasn't to me before either, where it was like, oh yeah, because it's persuasive to say Bress bad, get rid of Bress, because that doesn't cost anybody anything. But to say, okay, now to keep him out, we need to do this, that's a much harder sell.
And it lands much stronger in terms of like even the meaning of that whole 7 years, that like how difficult it is to plan and actually take action to make something better than it was before. When things are bad, you can point at all the problems, but actually taking the time to put the effort in to go through with a plan to actually finally finish it or attempt to finish it, that's the hard work. And that's where like, even, and I'm a big fan of Russell Brand, and his book Revolution was like, here's all the problems. And I was like, yeah, fuck, it's so many problems. But like, ultimately he admitted he doesn't really have any solutions, and there aren't that many being posited to deal with what we're kind of looking at in modernity and civilization at the moment.
And like, in some ways there are a lot of solutions being posited, but there's also, I think there's always a problem, and it happens a lot in kind of, progressive movements, and it happens in any movements that are trying to change things, really, which is that idealism is easy and action is hard. Because once you actually start doing something and it becomes real, it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. And there's such a kind of paralysis, I think, around acting imperfectly, that a lot of the time we just fail to act. Because while it's still an idea in your head, it's perfect. And we know this. I think it's the same thing about creating anything, whether it's a movement for justice or for change or for, environmentalism or whatever the fight is that you're engaged in. It's similar to creating something artistic. It's similar to creating a podcast or a painting or a story or whatever your artistic endeavor is. While it's in your head, it's perfect. While it's in your head, while it's not realized yet, while it's still a dream, it's perfect and it's ideal, but it's also not real. And so in order to manifest it, you kind of have to kill it, because you have to kill it in its perfection in order to make it manifest in the real imperfect world. And then once you put it out there, everybody can point at it and say, see, that's not perfect. That's
it's brilliant.
Like, that can be quite painful and quite vulnerable. And when you're talking about sort of movements for justice, it can get really, really fraught, because we all have a lot of blind spots. So, whatever action you or I might decide to take on something, we're not going to consider everybody's point of view, because we can't, because we're individuals. And so they are also always going to be imperfect. And it's easier and it's safer to stand on the sidelines and say that you did that wrong. And I think that's kind of, for me, that's where a lot of the problems of the world, a lot of them, it's not where they originate, but it's why they stay. It's why they're so persistent, and it's why they're so hard to shift.
And in that personal kind of element, it's like whatever about the problems of the world. It's like, write the book. Like it's easier to talk about it in the pub, but until you go and write the book, then you're putting in the hours, and you know all about it if you've ever written one. So like that's the real work. And sure, and that's kind of what Nuda is doing here. He's going, right, this is the plan. And I guess, and it also kind of opened the door to me to go, okay, maybe his army isn't all of the entire Ireland, because they all gather in Tara. And it finally makes sense why there's a gatekeeper saying, we have enough people. Because he must have been badgered. He must have been like, messages been sent, no, we shouldn't do this. Yeah, we should do. I was like, okay, look, I've enough people. We have an army. We have all of the food, the stores, the money. We have it sorted now. Feck off.
And I mean, I think it's I keep thinking of it in terms of a creative project, because obviously those are most of the kinds of big works that you and I have engaged in, where like there's definitely a phase of that where you're in like, tell me all of your ideas, give me all of your input, give me all of the stuff. And we both, I think, know that feeling of when you're on like draft 3 and then someone comes along and is like, well, what if you did it like this? And you're just like, fuck off.
Get out.
No, get out.
Out.
And it's like, it's not that maybe isn't a good idea. It's just like, this is not the time now. We are not now at the time of reinvent the wheel. Yeah. Everything is up in the air.
Write me a letter and post it to me last month.
Yeah, exactly.
Last year.
Travel back in time and tell me this idea when it was relevant, because this is not the stage we're at now. We're now at actually, this is the thing we're doing. And this is now has a momentum. And if we're to do this thing, this is what we need to do. And if we were to take your idea, it would be blow up this thing and go back to the drawing board. And that's not what we're doing, because otherwise you never get anywhere. Yeah. So it's kind of, it makes sense to me as well that Nuada gets to a point where he's like, all right, gates closed. If you're not in by now, I don't want to, you might be the best strategist in the world. I don't want to hear it. We have a strategy. It might not be the best, but it's what we've got.
So Lugh enters, and again, I love this idea that he's kind of picking up a mantle that he's not really sure, is he the Savile Donach, but he's deciding to give it a shot because it makes sense that he probably is. He, like, in a way, it's Neo from the Matrix. It's like, huh? Me?
Yeah, you're the one when you start acting like the one. It's not something that anybody else gives you. And yet I think it's interesting that like Lugh doesn't refer to himself as the Savile Donach. Like he's told by Manannán, and I kind of set it up in the last episode that Manannán is like, hey, the Savile Donach's going to kill Balor, and Lugh's like, I'm not really the master of all. And yet when he comes to Tara, he's like, hey, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And it's the gatekeeper and Nuada who go, oh, well, if you can do all of those things, then that makes you the Savile Donach. That is what that means. And so it's a title that's kind of given to him rather than him being like, hey, everybody, I'm the Savile Donach. I'm arrived. Like, he doesn't arrive on those terms. He arrives being like, I can do this one thing.
And taking your telling of like him knowing that prophecy, he doesn't wear that as a badge. Is like, hey, like, let me in. I've arrived. He really wants to get in, and if he's going to be in the right time in the right place, he'll do the thing. But he just wants to take part, and that's kind of like that's the great sign of any kind of true hero in these stories of like, I'll show up and I'll do the thing, but it's not kind of outcome orientated. It's not focusing on the end product. It's taking part in the action of what it is right here and right now, without the fame or any consequences that he's looking for. Which is kind of, again, a hallmark for a good guy.
It's a hallmark for, I think it's very much a hallmark for Lugh and young Lugh, is that he leads with humility and he leads with curiosity. And I think those are the kind of two points that we both really drilled into in this story and the last one, like about Lugh, that this is who he is at this stage in his life, that this is someone who's like, and that was kind of some of the contrast that we talked about before between him and Bress being the expert who knows he's the expert in his thing and therefore doesn't give a shit about anybody else's thing, where Lugh is the endlessly curious one who's like, oh, tell me about your thing because I don't know it. Let me hear about it. And so what he does then is also extremely Lugh, because when he's put in charge of the army, the first thing he does is he asks everybody. Now, of course, he has this little proving himself test first with Ogma, which I think is also kind of a nice little interaction of like, not all of the Tuatha de Dannan are like, oh, the savior has arrived, let's go lie down. Ogma is like, all right, prove it. Fucking prove it. Here's a flagstone. I'm throwing it away. It's shattered. Deal with that.
Yeah. And it's a great scene. I love that scene. Every time I've read it, like the fact that he throws them and they land right back. The three shattered pieces land perfectly back, on
Yeah.
top of each other. The completely impossible thing has been done, and he is not only the master of all and as strong as Ogma, but he's willing to try. He's willing to go out and just make a fool of himself and fail. But he does it, and he can do it. And then he goes about, again, the humility in that, like, he's given the job to be the general. Like, in my mind, he has no idea how to be a general. Like, he hasn't, because the first thing he does is he goes out and asks loads of questions.
Yeah.
And he just falls back onto that. Okay, what have I always done? I've asked questions. What can you do? What can you do? What can you do? And then he sets up the strategy for how he's going to defeat the army and help with the battle to come, which again is interesting because, like, coming from a skeptical point of view, you're like, all right, surely Nuada had this game plan kind of already set. Like, he doesn't really do anything other than, what does he overly do that Nuada wouldn't have done?
Well, this is, there isn't really, we don't have the details of it in this version. So that's kind of to be filled in, what Lugh might have changed or not, because their overall strategy is not that different from the one they faced the Firbolg with, which is, the healing well and the smith and the Dagda. Like, they have they have a setup in war that works for them, which is, we have these places of renewal where you can get your weapons renewed and your body renewed and your spirit renewed, and you can then go back and continue to fight. So they have these kind of, like, which I think is also, like, metaphorically great in terms of, like, any work of transforming the world, any metaphorical fights you have to fight. They have their day spa, they have their canteen, they have their nice place where you can get your nice things just all sharpened and lovely again. So they have, like, you just have
Nails
these, like,
done? Is that your nails done?
I mean, listen, somebody's
Or
got
just
to
become a salon.
sometimes you got to sharpen your weapons. But there's these little places of essentially, like, care and rest and restoration, because
Sure.
you can't fight day after day if you don't have a place to go and be restored. And so I think that's a really interesting thing in the kind of Tuatha de Dannan's strategy in general, is like, there's the fighting place and there's the restoration place. And in order for the fighting to work, the restoration has to be there in support of it, and is, like, gets kind of equal airtime to the battle in the telling. You know what I mean? Like, it's bashy, clashy, swords breaking and shields, but it's also like, and then there's Gubnu, who is making new spears, and then there's Credna, who is fixing them with rivets, and there is Lugh, and then there is, there's these people, there's this support staff, which I think is interesting, because I think it's the kind of thing that doesn't get mythologized very much, this kind of quiet, restorative, reparative work that's happening alongside the glorious.
Yeah, well, I think, and like, you remind me of the rounds of applause for the healthcare workers and stuff that's happened in this year, like people who, like, work in the health sector, who are, like, day to day. This is, a friend of mine, Mark, was like, I feel like I don't want the applause, because it's just like, this is my job. This is the thing that I'm doing for my work. And yet it's that kind of, it's because it's so underappreciated has probably been underappreciated for so long, that we're suddenly going, oh yeah, people, we can't do without that. And that's why I love this story, because it is equally weighted in, like, you go and you conquer the adversity, and you go over and you battle, and you get through the hardness of the day and whatever it is, but you also have to tend your own kind of vehicle and maintain it, and make sure that you're rested and healthy of mind, body, and spirit. And all of that takes time and practice and skill. And like, that's kind of what they're showing. It's like, you have to be able to be skilled in life to be able to, spend the time in your downtime to facilitate your, whether it's work or battling or running or whatever it is.
Whatever
You
you're
have to,
engaged in.
yeah, you have to maintain that high endurance, whatever it is you're doing, by the other half of your life,
And I gotta say, I like that it is ungendered in the Irish myth. You have men and women on the battlefield, and you have men and women in the support staff. And there are more men's names remembered, because there are more men's names remembered. We know why that is. We don't need to go into that again. But like, I think you often get that kind of work is often gendered in a way where it's like, the masculine energy is the going out there and active and battle-y stuff, and the feminine energy is the nurturing, lay down in this pool of herbs stuff. And I just like the fact that particularly in the second battle of Moy Tura, you have Dian Cecht and his son and his daughter. You have Gobnu and Credna, and then you have the woman, what's her name, Crom, sharpening the spears. And then out on the battlefield, you have Nuada fighting alongside Macha. You have you have the Morrigan. You have, you have the battle goddesses out there with the battle gods. And then you have, again, in the support staff, you have the healers and you have the crafts people, and they're both, which I just appreciate, because I think part of the reason that kind of healing work, that caring work is kind of ignored in our society and underappreciated, and has been for years, is because we tend to associate it with more feminine energy, and we tend to devalue the feminine energy, which I think is, bad.
That's fair. I would take that as a valid point. And like, it's frustrating as well, because I think one of the great things about what Lugh does and it's shown in this story, is like, he goes and asks not only Dian Cecht and Gobnu and the Dagda, but he asks kind of a wider selection of people, and the carpenter and the guy fixing the brass onto it, Credna, and more people. And of course, it's frustrating when Lady Gregory, the woman who wrote all this down, has no women mentioned. You're like, come on.
She does. She mentions Aramid. She mentions Macha. She mentions Crom. She doesn't. She doesn't ever. She's also transcribing, I think, she's of her time as well, and so she's transcribing the stories that she's hearing, and she's sanitizing them a little bit in a way that, in the same way that we are, like, we're reinterpreting them through our own lens.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's always a little bit of a like, come on, lady, give the other women their due. It's not just you.
So there's kind of two or three final points I want to touch on, but we had very briefly kind of gone through how we're going to tell this, and we were happy with it. Then we went back and you read me the Lady Gregory kind of version over the weekend, and we were, right, there's two bits here that we really want to put in, and one of it is the Dagda's porridge, which is just a great episode, and in and of itself, it's a story. Like, you could tell that like it's a fantastic piece. We have, and to kids, like, as just one whole, because his belly goes so massive, he throws it over his shoulder, like, and drags it along his ground because he's eaten so much, and there's all forms of meat and meal and everything into this porridge, and he's even eating stones and mud,
gravel.
Like,
it's a hilarious story about the Dagda as a kind of a personality and as a person, because I think, it's a very kind of it's a very Dagda move for him to be like, I'm gonna go talk to them. Like, that's my first instinct in this situation. We're nearly ready for war. I'm gonna go talk to them. I'm gonna go see if they'll, like, agree to some terms. And then of course you have this, like, mockery of hospitality from the people that Bress is fighting with, which is a real, like, I don't know, it felt really edged to me this time. I think because we're telling this in such a sequence, from the Bress story to the Balor story to the Lugh story to this story, it just kind of, in a way that it hasn't before, because I've often told this as sort of a singular episode, or as an episode leading up to the second battle, but like not necessarily in the same flow as telling the Bress story. But like having it be like, you guys like hospitality? Well, here's a bucket of grossness, and if you don't finish every single bite of it, I'm going to kill you. Like, it's really nasty, and it's also very in character, I think, for the Dagda to be like, okay, I'll eat absolutely every single bit of it, and then I'll go away and make a deal with the battle goddess to fuck you up.
Yeah. It's a bizarre one, but again, I guess it shows the willingness for the Dagda to do literally anything and
I
everything
mean,
for his group.
I think he and the Morrigan have a thing. I think he and the Morrigan, I don't think that's their only time that they get off. I think they, because Dagda's a very I always think Dagda has a lot of kind of feminine qualities for a god, and the Morrigan has a lot of like masculine qualities for a goddess. You know, in that way where I know I was just kind of talking about how they blend that in Irish mythology, but I like that in both of them. Like, you know, he's a god with a cauldron, which is usually a very kind of feminine fertility symbol, and she's a goddess with a sword, which is usually a very masculine fertility symbol. And I think I don't necessarily think that they're ever going to get married and settle down, because I don't think either of them are the type. But I like that they
Sure.
have these liaisons. And like, they're, I I don't know. I really enjoy the idea of like fat gods and giant goddesses getting it on happily and to their mutual satisfaction. You know what I mean? It's great.
Here,
Not
here.
not everybody's got to be like an Adonis. You know what I mean?
Gotta have the round, the chunky ones too.
Exactly. Just a chunky dude and a giant lady, and they're just having it off together over a river. Like, I find it really funny. I remember telling this story to a group of American students once. And I had also told him various stories of tragedy and violence. And the professor who was leading the trip, who's Russell, you met Russell. He was hello, Russell, if you're still listening to the podcast.
He's a big giant Santa Claus.
He's a big giant Santa Claus himself. But we were chatting about it afterwards, and he said that it was what really struck him was that it was really making clear to his students that these were kind of adult stories. These are not like children's stories. And it really struck me that this kind of funny story that has sex in it was considered, by him and his students. And I suppose by me, when I thought about it as well, as like way more like, oh, that's not appropriate for children, versus all of the stories of gore and violence and heartbreak and tragedy. And I think there's something very odd in our culture where we're like, kids can't hear about people having sex, but they sure can hear about lots and lots of murder. It's a weird thing. Anyway, I'm just saying it's a weird thing. I don't have a solution.
Yeah, I think whenever I've been faced with that, I've always liked to make a nod to it. And a nod to the adults in the room, and if it's predominantly aimed at kids, to say, yeah, they fell in love and they spent a lovely night together, and the following day they left, or whatever it is, or not going into this explicit details of the sexual encounter, but also making it there, like not skipping it, not like letting it sit there for that, whenever they're figuring it out, going, hang on, that's what that is, right? And waiting for that to happen, because they're going to ask questions.
They'll figure it out at some point, probably, I suppose.
The other one that we nearly left out of this story was
Ruadon, son of Bress and Brigid.
And I'd forgotten about him, and this is the first time there was ever a keening in Ireland, which is this utterly heart-wrenching, beautiful way of dealing with grief, which is not in our culture anymore, but it certainly has some connotations or connections, because I think the Irish deal with death well. We surround each other. We, like any, our grandmother's funeral in January, even though she was from a different county, there was just lots of people came up to show up in social distance ways, and whoever had else had died during this year, I've just seen so much outpouring of people trying to show up, and it's been a really strange year for any death to be around, because usually Irish people are just thronged into the one space and just showing everyone that is upset that they're there and they're feeling it, and they're also like wailing and being sad and crying and bawling in public is not something that's discouraged. And it comes back to this idea of keening, which is, I think the longest lasting keeners were on the Aran Islands, and they, like the old women, they would literally be jobs. They would go to.
It was a job. You would go to the funerals and you would keen, and keening is kind of like, it's sort of like a shrieking sob. It's not a song. Like the banshee is keening. That's what her cry is. To give people, I guess, a reference. Like that's why she's a death omen, because she keens for you before your death, if you're one of the families that she appears to. And so it was a really kind of important part of the culture, and like it was a thing that was done at funerals, and it was kind of like a place to express the grief that these keeners would come and wail for the dead, as a real sort of public demonstration of grieving. And like it's true, we're much more public in the way that we deal with funerals than I think a lot of cultures. Like I often have this.
There's a lot of African cultures that have the same thing, apparently. And I heard an amazing story recently about a guy, a British guy, who lost his child tragically, and he was just kind of, numb and couldn't deal with it, and his wife wasn't with him at the time, and the cleaner came back after being away for 2 weeks, and in the interim the kid had died. And so the cleaner, who had kind of babysat and minded the kid, and he turned to her and told her about the horrible accident, and she just went on her knees and wailed and shrieked, and it was animalistic. And the report that I heard was he finally felt some actual grieving come up. And it was that brought it out of him, and he actually felt sad, and he felt, because that's what it does. It literally brings your heart up and opens you up to that emotion and that response, which is adequate and necessary and needs to be done, because if you don't, you get stuck, and then the emotions don't move properly, and you go through your day and you're like a bit burned.
It's funny, when you say it's animalistic, because I think that there is something about a lot of the problems that we get into as human beings is when we try and pretend that we're not animals. And when we try and actually deny that, and we try and kind of go, oh, well, this noise is too bestial, and it's uncouth, and I don't like it. That's where we tend to get really stuck in various different ways. Whereas when there's actually an acknowledgement of like, actually, this is a time to scream like the world is ending, because you can give voice to that. It brings a different thing. I remember talking to I was interviewing some African women around the time that Nelson Mandela died, which was a few years ago now. And one of them told me that they were going to, it was the day that he died, or it was the day after he died. It just so happened to be. And one of the women was telling me that she was going to go to St. Patrick's Cathedral. They were having, a lot of the people, the South Africans in Dublin, were having like a gathering there. And she said, like, people who aren't African don't understand. Like, we'll be there, we'll be singing, we'll be crying, we'll be laughing all at the same time. And often Europeans don't get it. And I was like, I think you haven't been in Ireland very long, because I think you'll find we get it.
Yeah.
Because I think actually our death traditions are they're quite deep as well here, and I think they're, it's something that we've talked about before, because I think it's something that we're both proud of in an odd way, that we don't have
in an odd way.
Well, like I think a lot of the Western world has a really dysfunctional disconnection from death and mortality. And I think in Ireland we have managed to hold on to quite a lot of our much more functional human animal relationship with death. A lot of it. Now, I think that the keeners is a good example of something that we haven't held on to and that's actually has been lost. And only in the last kind of like how long were the Aron Island keeners going on for? Like that's
about an old lady and a half ago.
yeah. yeah. Like it's
Not even, like probably one old lady ago.
Probably an old lady ago. So yeah, like it's not that far removed from us. But yeah, the Bridget Keening is a really interesting one.
I mean, it does remind me of when cattle get their calves removed from them, and they're separated to be like whatever, either fattened or put into different fields and stuff, and the lowing of the cows, it just goes on, and it's just this belly aching, roar, and it's animalistic, and it's a cry, and it's an absolutely tragic and such a sorrowful thing to hear, and you're just like, oh, cows, stop making me feel bad for your cows. Like, but it's that like wail that you kind of have to do, I think, in order to get over the grief of a son, a loved one, and anything. And yeah, like you say, it's a weird thing to be kind of proud of, but I think when you wear your heart on your sleeve, you get a few more bruises, but you're able to see that it's beating that bit more. You know you're alive, and you know that you're going to die. And maybe one of the problems with that this year showed us is that the world is terrified of death, and maybe we shouldn't be that terrified of death, because we all gotta die, guys.
We all gotta do it. So on that note, everybody, please remember that someday you too will die. Someday this too will pass, and this includes you, and that's okay, because you know what? So does everybody else. So we're all in that one together, guys, and hopefully you will leave a story behind you.
Yeah, a good one. Almost as good as Lugh throwing the either stone or spear across the battlefield and bashing Balor's eye out of his head.
I like it when it's a stone. It gives me very David and Goliath vibes, but
yeah, it depends on what you want.
I also like the slow burn, no pun intended, of taking off the veils one at a time, which I usually forget when we're doing this live, and I'm like halfway through it and I'm like, crap, I forgot the sequence of the veils again.
Yeah, no, it's true. And actually, interestingly, again, I wasn't sure, but usually we've left Balor kind of sitting at the back of this army, waiting for his time, because he's so old and so hideous and so grotesque and huge. But this time, because Lady Gregory mentions him in the battle a few times and killing Nuada, again, it was, it was nice to put him back into the human aspect of fighting in the war and actually, being the heavy blows. Like, he can't die, but he's fighting away, and he's
fighting away.
Goes, all right, fuck it. You're getting nuked.
And did you clock who took the Dagda down in this story? Balor's wife, Kathleen of the Crooked Teeth.
Kathleen. Yeah, sorry for
Kathleen goes toe to toe with the Dagda, and she lays him out. Woman's scary. Like, it's so yeah, the Balor and his missus, and this is apparently why the ancient Romans were afraid of the Celts, because they brought their wives into battle with them, which is, I think, a really funny way of saying they had female soldiers, but
it is actually a very funny way.
It's an interesting interpretation of that.
Right. Now that you say it out loud, I hear it, and how I hear the weirdness. I hadn't, though, before. Yeah. Kathleen, she's some towns named after up north. I can't remember the names of the towns, but I remember looking that up. Cool. So she is in some way remembered. But yeah, fair play to Kathleen of the Crooked Teeth. Mental name, mad name, but she did one for Bal.
She done laid out the Dagda. She didn't kill him, but she did knock him out.
So come here.
yeah.
This podcast is actually going to be, recorded before we get a chance to listen to the music that Ruairi O'Shea has put to it. Now, Ru is doing a great thing of putting his interpretation, his way of putting the music up, talking about how he's done it up on our Patreon page as well. So if you're interested about how Ruairi has been putting together the music, if you want to listen to the music on its own, that'll be going up onto our YouTube page as well as our Patreon pre-release. So there's those bonuses going up. We've been trying to get to the bonuses, and thankfully Ru is taking that on.
Ru took that on. So Ru, making the music podcast series is going up on Patreon for anybody who wants to who's curious about that.
And thank you so much for listening as always, guys. Our Patreon page is candlelittales.com/no wait.
Nope, other way around.
Patreon.com.
Patreon.com/candlelittales. Or you can actually go to our website, Candlelit where there is a link to our Patreon and a link to, there will be links to our upcoming shows when we get to have upcoming shows again. There is also a link to a PayPal button where you can make a one-time donation if you don't want to commit to a Patreon thing, which we totally get.
And no worries if not, lads, because if you like and share, subscribe, or follow us on the old socials, that also helps. Every little helps, and hopefully you just enjoyed these stories. And we're nearly finished the invasion story series, but we're not quite yet. We've a couple more stories coming, and it's been an amazing one to try and condense into a series of stories, and it's taken us through spring and well into summer now, and it'll probably see us through summer by the end of it. But look, thanks very much, and keep her lit.
You.